Hey fellow Victory Stitches, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. This week we are going to be talking about some tools you'll need to get yourself started with sewing. And the sewer's best friend is Jack, the seam ripper. This will literally be your best friend because you will make mistakes. It doesn't matter how experienced you are, but this little fella here is going to help save your bacon. Now, I've done a little line of stitching here just to give you a demonstration on how to unpick some stitches that you may have put in the wrong place. You may have sewn something a little bit too far over. So rather than unpicking every single stitch, we'll probably do every third or fourth one, and it's just a matter of sliding that long hook under a stitch and breaking it. Third, fourth one along, doing the same. Third, fourth one along, and keep going like that. When you turn it over, you can see the bobbin thread has all but come away and you've pulled out your seam. Now I haven't done the whole thing because there is another way to do it, and this is quite handy when you're dressmaking, is to actually pull the piece of fabric aside and go in where you can see the stitch joining the two pieces together. Give it a little cut, a little tug, and it rips a few at a time. Little cut, little tug. This is particularly good if you're unpicking a seam, if you've been making a shirt, or if you're wanting to unpick a hem that you've sewn in the wrong place. Just whichever works for you. And that is Jack. Pins. Now, dressmakers' pins come in various shapes and sizes for various types of fabric, but I tend to stick to a good old berry pin. It's about 1 inch long with a little plastic ball on the end. Some of them come with glass, which is actually really good if you're going to be ironing because the heat of the iron won't harm the glass, but for goodness sake, don't use the plastic ones with the iron. I keep mine in a pin cushion, so they're just nice and handy. They're there beside my machine all the time. The other way you can use a pin cushion is the kind that goes on your wrist, which is also very handy, particularly when you're in the middle of sewing and you're pulling pins out as you go. They just go straight back into the pin cushion as you go. Absolute godsend, these things. And later on down the track I will be doing some tutorials on how to make each of these pin cushions. They're actually a lot simpler than they look, but you can make them and impress all your friends. You may also find pins in a box, and some of them are magnetic, which is very handy because if you're going to knock it, your pins aren't going to fall on the floor. Because if you drop 10 pins on the floor, the chances are you will only find 9, and your child or your dog or your husband or wife will find the 10th one, and that won't be a happy thing. Perhaps the most useful tool in your arsenal will be the scissors. Now these are quite heavy duty upholstery shears which I inherited from my father-in-law, but they are excellent for cutting fabric for dressmaking, upholstery or fine furnishings, anything like that. Make sure you keep them nice and sharp, and please don't cut paper or cardboard with them because that will blunt them really quickly. If you are like me and do paper crafts as well, keep a separate set of scissors for that. Don't intermingle the two. You can demote your sewing scissors to paper cutting scissors later down the track if they're blunted and you want to upgrade, by all means, but don't use your sewing scissors for cutting paper, and please don't let anybody in your house do it either. These just cut a nice straight line. Nice, clean, straight line. Something that is not essential, but I do recommend, especially if you are doing things like dressmaking, is a pair of pinking shears. So they've got the zigzag blade on them, and they cut a zigzag line, so that actually reduces fraying in your fabric. You'll end up with this. and the fabric won't fray, unlike the straight line that gets very bitsy and very messy. Check out our last video, which will discuss finishing your edges. I did a little demonstration with a zigzag stitch to finish an edge to stop it from fraying, but your pinking shears will do the job pretty well also. The other thing I find really useful is a little pair of snips. These are just thread snippers. So if I have a length of thread that is just hanging around, it's nice and easy just to go in and snip it off close to the fabric. A little easier to maneuver than a great big pair of scissors. Not essential, but really, really handy. And if you are into quilting, a rotary cutter is invaluable. You can also use them for dressmaking, and a lot of people do. Personally, I don't like using them. I don't feel I have the level of control that I would get with a pair of scissors, but that is a personal choice, and you need to experiment to find out which works best for you. Now, if you're going to get yourself a rotary cutter, it pays to invest in a good quality one. This is a Fiskars brand, and they are really, really well known for good scissors and good cutting blades and good rotary cutters. Now, get a retracting blade because it's a safety feature. Now, this blade here is locked. The handle, when I depress it, doesn't do anything until I unlock, and then that blade comes out. I can also lock that blade in place to leave it like that. Not the best idea personally, because if you drop that on your feet and you're not wearing footwear, you're going to get quite a nasty cut. They are exceptionally sharp. I can't stress that enough. I have seen so many people on Facebook commenting on how they've had to go to the emergency room and actually get their hands stitched, and then they're asking questions on how to get blood out of fabric, and I'm not joking. It's pretty wicked. So I prefer to use it where as soon as I let go, the blade retracts back again. They are fantastic with a quilting ruler to get the most perfect straight lines that you need for strips and squares to stitch together to patchwork, and you will get high accuracy, more so than opening and closing blades on a pair of scissors. The self-healing cutting mat, the one I'm showing you at the moment, is not really a dressmaker's one. It's the same material, but it doesn't have the 1-inch marks, the 1/2-inch marks, and the diagonal 45-degree lines that you would need. It's just that the one I use is in our garage, and it's a bit big to show you at the moment on the camera in my sewing room. These are fantastic. They take the blade really well, and with the use of a quilting ruler to get a nice straight line, you will get perfect straight lines rather than trying to chop with scissors. The tape measure, very, very old piece of equipment, but very, very helpful. And I'm in New Zealand, and we have the metric system here, but I know that our viewers in the United States are still on feet and inches, and to be honest, a lot of the videos that I follow are American, so I've learnt to speak inch and foot as well as centimetres and metres. And when I'm patchworking especially, I'm talking 1/4 inch seams and 5/8 inch seams and all the rest of it. This is just a soft malleable plastic. It just rolls up. You can get these for next to nothing in the stores. But they are very handy for measuring your body in case you're wanting to do dressmaking, for measuring the lengths of the fabric that you've got. If you're quilting, you're better to go with the plastic rulers for quilting, but down the track we'll talk about those in more detail. But tape measures, absolutely important. And probably the last essential item you would need would be the humble hand stitching needle. Now, I've got a ton of them in here because I've collected them over the years, and they've all got different names, and some are called sharps and some are called other darning needles, and I just grabbed the one that looks best for the job. You would use them for hand stitching a hem, sometimes tacking things down, gathering stitches, all the little bits and pieces that you can't necessarily do on your machine, but I've also used them in quilting when I've been attaching my binding or sewing down my binding. With a hand stitching needle, you can get a threader. If the eye of the needle is really small, this can be very, very handy to help you thread, especially if you're like me and you wear glasses. Sometimes it's harder to see those tiny holes when you get a bit older than if you're younger. And a thimble can be quite a good idea to put on the end of your finger to help push that needle through, especially if your fabric is thick, because you don't want even the end of the needle with the eye on it can still be pretty pointy. It's pretty uncomfortable, so sometimes a metal thimble is also advisable. A little bin just to put your scraps, because trust me, your floor will thank you for it. And if you're like us, we have a dog who loves to pick up bits and pieces off the floor, especially tissues and pieces of fabric and thread, and eat them. So keep your dog's gut happy. Get yourself a little bin just to put your scraps in. Just keep it next to your machine. You'll be amazed. It's small, but you'll be amazed how much this thing will hold. Now for a few little extra things that are helpful, not essential, but recommended. Tweezers to pull thread through when you are threading your sewing machine needle. Really, really handy. Also for threading your serger overlocking machine, because you've got 2 needles on there and a couple of loopers, and it's pretty fiddly in there. So these actually came with my overlocking machine, and they are extremely handy. Tailor's chalk. You can get this in a number of different forms. Sometimes you get in a little round piece that you just apply. It's marking lines on for darts or stitching lines or hem lines. I've got one that's a bit like a pencil, and that just leaves a mark on your fabric and it washes off. A stiletto or an awl. This is used for piercing holes in fabric. You might want to pierce a hole to put in a stud or a rivet or some kind of bit of hardware. Also handy when you're sewing, if you're sewing through a few layers and you've got a lump that you need to get over, sometimes handy for holding things down and just getting past. I'll show you what I mean later on when we start actually sewing different projects. A friction pen. This is a pen that people would use to write with, but also I find handy for marking things on fabric that I don't want to stay there. Used much like the tailor's chalk. This friction pen, that's Frixion, it's done by Uniball, actually leaves ink on, but it comes off as soon as you place your iron over it, and as soon as heat goes over it, the ink goes invisible. It doesn't disappear completely, so I have heard that if the weather gets very, very cold, some of that ink will reappear. So it doesn't go away, but for all intents and purposes it disappears. A hem gauge, really handy if you're hemming a garment. So the little red slider you set to the length you want. So I have set this to 1 inch, and you can keep it along the side of your edge of your fabric to mark that 1 inch. Mark it off with a pen or a piece of chalk every so often, and you can check. It's great when you're pressing up a hem with the iron, so you can just make sure that you don't have to eyeball that 1 inch. You know that 1 inch is a true 1 inch, and suddenly when you get round to the beginning again you haven't gone off, you've kept it accurate. Really, really handy. Not essential. I only started using one myself about a year ago, but it is really useful. Washi tape or painter's tape. Check out the last video because we used it on the machine to mark our seam allowance. You can use it for, depending on what seam allowance you're using, 1/4 of an inch for patchworking, 5/8 of an inch for dressmaking, or 1/2 an inch, or whatever your pattern requires. That helps you, give you a visual guide for where your material needs to be up against. And the last thing, probably the biggest, maybe the most expensive item, but you cannot get by without it, is your steam iron. The most basic steam iron will do the job. You'll get to know your different fabrics, so you've got temperature gauges depending on whether you're synthetic or natural fibres. So linen would be right up the hottest temperature. A little bit cooler than that would be your cotton, then your wool, then your synthetics. You need the steam to push through to get those seams and everything set. So if you are pressing open a seam on a garment that you're making, you need to press it and then you puff the steam through, and that helps hold it into place. Obviously with this you'll need an ironing board as well. Some people use a small ironing board. It's only like, you know, on a piece of, it's padded piece of wood that they keep next to their sewing machine. Perfect for the likes of patchworking and small things. I don't have one of those, but maybe I can sweet talk my husband into making me one. But I use a standard ironing board that I would use to iron my laundry as well. So I just have that set up in my sewing room, and the iron is on usually most of the time that I'm sewing, but you make sure it's best to get one with steam. So preferably with that shot of steam function that puffs the steam through and helps set your stitches. That's about all I've got for today, but I know everybody's different, so I'd love to hear what the rest of you like to use when you're sewing, and if you've got any tried and true little tools that you could not live without, please share in the comments below. I would love to hear from you, and don't forget, give us a thumbs up if you like this video and subscribe. I'll see you next time.